Greetings and welcome to my channel. This is Sorcerer Tal. You can also find me on Facebook in the Sorcerer's Guild. Today on Magical Theory, we are going to be discussing the pendulum. Now, the pendulum is the first tool that I have introduced to the channel that is operating primarily off of the mental plane rather than the astral. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, the pendulum accesses the subconscious mind. And through the subconscious mind, we are reaching up to the mental plane, which is the plane of information, rather than the astral plane, the plane of energy. There are three states of existence. I've covered this in past videos, but we'll go through it for just a moment. Okay, so there's the mental plane, and this is the idea of this is the realm of ideas and concepts. This is the raw information of reality. As that information goes into motion, this creates energy, and that information in transfer or thoughts is the step of the mental plane, reaching down into the astral where that thought becomes energy, and then that energy condenses into the matter of the physical realm. And these three shouldn't be seen as like a line, yeah? It should be seen like a pyramid. So it's not like the astral plane is closer to the material plane than the mental plane is, okay? It's like a pyramid, and each one has its spot, and they are should be equally distanced from each other, ideally. That is actually, I talk in other videos about the rift in our plane, and that's where it is the astral plane is essentially, its point has been pulled farther out. And this throws off the balance of all three and creates the problems that we are experiencing in our modern world. But that is for another video. So, pendulum works off of the mental plane. I have several videos going into using the pendulum for self-hypnosis, where we talk about how to control a pendulum, and we're going to go over that again real quick, just so that you understand what is going on here, because we will be controlling the pendulum in order to perform the exercise that we are working up to today, which will be opening a circle using a pendulum, which again, reaching down from the mental plane to the astral, and then using that circle for whatever purpose you choose. Of course, the obvious purpose would be then having a clear circle with which to use the pendulum in. Okay, so as I said, we can actually control the way that a pendulum moves. And we're going to go over that real quick here. So you hold the pendulum out, and you don't want to consciously try to move the pendulum. You don't want to be like, stirring it like that. That's not what I'm suggesting. Okay? You hold the pendulum out like this, and then you begin telling the pendulum to move without consciously taking any action to do so. You simply tell it to move. I'm going to tell it to move in a gestal or clockwise circle. And as I stare at it and tell it to do so, it is doing so. Okay, now, this isn't exactly telekinesis or a magic trick. No, that depends on how you define magic, because we're reaching up to the mental plane to cause this, but our hand is reacting, yeah? That subconscious that we are guiding, which is the area between your conscious mind and the mental plane, takes action and begins causing little tiny jitters in your hand that will cause the pendulum to swing or move in whichever direction it is that you tell it to move. But like I said, we're using the subconscious to access the mental plane. So this is a good thing. Yeah, we're getting the subconscious used to responding to commands from the conscious mind. And in this case, we're telling it to spin around in a circle. And that will be useful again in a minute. Now, I used to be hesitant to use a pendulum for yes or no answers, because I was conscious. I've been aware of this fact that I could consciously control the pendulum since I was a small child. So I was concerned with the yes or no's. The way that we can get around that, once we have this knowledge, is simply to will ourselves not to control the pendulum. Yeah? And then ask the question. And that can be even more useful when we create a circle. And part of in creating that circle, we are able to give our subconscious mind instructions. And one of those instructions will be not to influence the pendulum on its own. Yeah? Okay. So, that's the whole trick, yeah? You just hold the pendulum out and tell it to move. In this case, like I said, we're going for a clockwise circle. We could do a counterclockwise circle depending on if you were wanting to create a circle that was removing presences to create a declared space, or if you want to be opening up a declared space and bringing energy out. Yeah? And there are reasons why you might want to do one or the other. Typically, you're going to go clockwise unless you're like attempting to open a circle to pull energy from something. So like if you were going to use energy vampirism, you would definitely be, through this method, you would definitely be going in a counterclockwise direction to open your circle. And then, well, it's another video. Let's stick to the one at hand. So, for this circle, we are going to be using the pendulum in a clockwise direction. And what we do is you simply hold the pendulum out in front of you. And then in previous videos as well, I've talked about charging, creating an energy vortex within the self. So, we're going to start with that energy vortex in the center of the heart chakra. Imagine that spiral coming out in a clockwise direction. Wider and wider, stronger and stronger. And then it goes through the shoulder, elbow, hand, forearm, into the hand. And then we imagine that energy going down the chain and into the pendulum. And we will it to begin spinning with that energy in a clockwise direction. And as the pendulum is opening up, you can either set, as it spins, you either will imagine this, but I also like to use a statement of intent because to me this is essentially a form of self-hypnosis that we are using. And the statement of intent would be, as the pendulum turns, the circle begins to open. As the pendulum turns, the circle begins to open. As the pendulum turns, the circle begins to open. As the pendulum turns, the circle begins to open. When the pendulum stops turning, the circle will be open. And then you don't stop the energy from the hand. You simply imagine the circle, the vortex coming out and becoming solid as a circle rather than continuing to spin and opening up as a vortex that opened up like a portal that had become open. And then when it is stable, the pendulum will cease to spin. And then if you want to be sure, you can say, I use back and forth for yes and side to side to no. Is the portal open? And it begins to spin, or excuse me, wave back and forth, which for me is a yes. Okay, you can stop now. There's really nothing wrong with using your hand to stop a yes or no answer to get your pendulum steady again. And then you can add protections to the circle if you want. So, now that I've opened the circle in a clockwise direction, I will say, as the pendulum turns widdershins, or counterclockwise, all negative influences are removed from the circle. And the pendulum begins to spin counterclockwise. As the pendulum spins counterclockwise, gestural widdershins, I prefer to use widdershins. As the pendulum turns widdershins, all negative influences are removed from the circle. As the pendulum slows. All influences, all outside influences are removed from the circle. And then as the pendulum comes to rest, the circle will be free of all negative influences. And then you allow it to come to rest. This time you don't want to use your hand. I mean, I did a little bit there on accident because I leaned to talk to you, but you don't want to, that when you're saying things like when the pendulum rests, those times you don't want to manually stop the pendulum. You want to let it come to a stop. And at this point, you have the circle open. And then if you are calling a particular deity to speak with, a method that you could use would be then, as the pendulum turns, Asfaras is summoned to the circle. As the pendulum turns, Jeshul, Asfaras, is summoned to the circle. As the pendulum turns, Asfaras is summoned to the circle. When the pendulum ceases to turn, Asfaras will have entered the circle. And then this is definitely one where you don't want to force the stop. We're just going to use Asfaras, the guild egregore, because she's the safest to summon. She's good for practice if anyone wants to do this. Okay. And once it stops, are you present, Asfaras? Okay. So we're not getting a strong reading, but she is present here. And it's getting stronger. Look at that. Okay, and that's how we can create a circle with this. Now, when you're done with this, you want to make sure that you close the circle. So, I'm going to go ahead and give Asfaras leave to depart with the promise that I will later give her an offering for her arriving here. Because I do like to give Asfaras offerings when I summon her, but we don't have time to do that on this video. So I'm simply going to promise her that I will leave her an offering at a later date. Is this acceptable to you, Asfaras? Okay, so I'll give you leave to depart for now if you wish. And let the pendulum go back to center, please. Okay. Are you ready for me to close the circle? Alright. So, now we will close the circle. And that's done in a very similar method to how we opened it. We will say, as the pendulum spins widdershins, the circle will close. As the pendulum spins widdershins, the circle will close. As the pendulum spins widdershins, the circle will close. When the pendulum ceases to spin, the circle will be closed. Okay, and then, just to be sure, has the circle been left open? Okay. I think that will be it for this episode. Thank you once again for joining us. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please take the opportunity to do so now. Until next time, bright blessings and an interesting fate. This has been Sorcerer Tal.